And thank you very much for this very interesting statistical analysis. As you mentioned, this bias of survey data, does exist a study of verification how realistic are these survey data? Yeah. So were they verified by excavation or?
Yeah. So we have an excavation in this region. The project integrates survey and test excavation as well. But the excavation covered just a very small section of very complex rural settlement, so that we have only a small window to this stratigraphic context and not an extensive picture. So we can profit more from the regional approach in this case than from a very punctual stratigraphic study of a unique settlement, you know. So it is just a test site where we have the possibility to understand, of course, chronology and structure, but only for one site, and with the survey, so it is the potential and the strength of the survey is the possibility to give the regional context and to consider more sites and settlement systems and not only one site. But it is a very popular issue. So the comparison between survey and excavation at the same site in order to look at reliability of surface pottery, of course, yeah. But mostly it is as well very difficult because you have to have luck just to to be able to excavate in the right place. So it is not possible to verify all the phases. So if you excavate in an area where the settlement development is like dating to late antiquity, you can only document this phase, and with the survey you can document all the occupation, frequentation phases. So it is actually very difficult, this kind of comparison, as well at the statistical levels. So we have many studies dealing with this problem, but yeah, it is very difficult. Yeah.
I wanted to ask what
yeah.
you mean by visibility.
By
visibility.
Yeah.
In the last slides, you show the visibility of the site in terms of.
Yeah, in terms of land use, basically, because you have like vegetation covering fields or ploughing soils. So it is, yeah, okay. It is basically a question of land use and vegetation. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
You said you were using the ceramic styles as proxies for the chronological periods. Can you elaborate on what you were doing there exactly?
What?
What you were doing there exactly?
So typological, just as a very classical typological analysis of pottery. So it is the bedrock of archaeological dating, basically. So we just analyze typology. For example, African red slip ware is a suitable example for that because it is a very diagnostic pottery, so you can distinguish well the typological evolution and the forms, and these forms are very well dated, so we can date to the quarter of century at least, so it is a very fine-grained chronology if we use this class. But for example, if you rely on other classes, the figures are completely different. So it is this concept of diagnosticity. So we have to rely on pottery in the survey in order to date, and we have some very diagnostic material and some low diagnostic material, like handmade pottery, for example. It has been produced over time, very long, and always according to the same models, and so you can't really rely chronology, fine-grained chronology on handmade pottery. But for sigillata, for example, this kind pottery, there are this kind of dishes, for example, so it is very well datable. So typology, so it is not a stylistic work, it is typological analysis, and this typology gives the dating range. For some material we have a very broad range, and for some material a very fine-grained range. So it depends very strong. So the survey results depend very strong on the material you are dating. The other point is that all the models, like demographic, economic models using regional data set from surveys, they are lying on pottery. So it is a problem for the definition of site's contemporaneity. In the last 20 years, for example, survey archaeologists are very confident with GIS systems, so like with the use of digital and geographical quantitative models, for example, in order to understand the settlement patterns. But the bedrock for this model is chronology of sites. So without a reliable chronology, we can't produce reliable maps and reliable models. So it is just an example. It is not the focus on the statistics here. It is the focus just on the approach. For example, you have phase maps like here. So phase maps for every chronological slice, time slice, and so each picture, every figure depicts contemporary settlements. So it is the problem of the definition of this contemporaneity, basically. And then the use of the reliable contemporary settlement in order to create settlement models and settlement geographical approaches. Yeah, so that's the point. The difficulty, so the limits. So it has as well potential, I think, for example, at this stage. So it is really a problem in survey archaeology, the definition of typology, so site classification. It is a very big problem because we have just to consider scatters, so surface scatters. In North Africa, you have more luck because we have very well preserved landscapes, so we have more indications on the function and typology and as well status and hierarchy of sites. But usually if you work, for example, in Italy and do survey in Italy, so you just you don't have this kind of conservation, of preservation, because of mechanized agriculture and other post-depositional processes, so that we rely basically only on surface pottery sherds. And So I think the use of some proxies like longevity of occupation and not only separated time slices. So this kind of approach can bring more. So here you have like a very simple, it is not complex methodologically speaking, but it is just in order to think about that. So you have here like a duration of occupation mapped like sized dots. So it is like an indicator of stability of settlement, persistency of settlement in different topographical settings, related probably to environmental features like soil qualities, for example, and topographic features like slope facing, or yeah. It is just the possibility to combine these spatial and environmental qualities, attributes, together with ceramic distribution and correlations between different materials in order to look at groups. So at this stage, the cluster analysis considers this kind of parameters in order to define groups. These groups are very general and they just share some features. So it is the risk is very high to generate high historical models. So it is a very critical step in the interpretation of these groups, but it is like a tool in order to think about and to make order maybe in these very big data sets.
I wanted to ask a last question,
yeah.
More at a more abstract level.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because what strikes me, you mentioned when you showed the image about clustering, that what remains a central issue is the interpretation. You get an output from some clustering method, and then how to interpret that, how to relate that to traditional theories in archaeology remains the problem. And this strikes me as being something very similar to what we have also in digital humanities, where the cluster text, then the analysis and the interpretation is always an issue. But my question was more your feeling about the acceptance of quantitative methods in archaeology. How well accepted are they right now? Because from a digital humanities point of view, in archaeology there is a longer history of using this kind of methods. What is your feeling being in the field from traditional archaeologists? Or maybe there are not any more traditional archaeologists. All archaeologists are computational archaeologists. But what is your feeling about the acceptance of these methods? And how well they are related to more general theories in archaeology?
Yeah, so theoretically speaking, it dates back to the new archaeology, so the first use of quantitative methods. So it has a long history, indeed. So it has as well acceptance, but we are now in the post-processual phase, so that we have to think about the problems and the limitations, and we are possibilists and not like positivists in our views. So it is just so we have probably to develop more fuzzy approaches, so like flexible methodologies in order to formalize results, but to be able to remain flexible in the interpretation of the results. So it's a problem. So I don't believe in many of these models, and so I always adopt. So I very often use, of course, these models, and I am enthusiastic as well for the possibility you have to formalize and to document and to quantify a big data set, but it remains a difficult stage of the interpretation. So how can we interpret these figures? And because of this reason, I think recently survey archaeologists, for example, they are pointing like more to the question of archaeological inference, so that we consider more diversity of activities and not only statistical inference. So I don't know if you can understand. I think so. It is the difference between this archaeological and statistical inference, because sometimes is, if you are not confident with archaeology, so, for example, statistical inference is like recovery biases. So the real versus expected site number in a certain space. So you have, as a result, the archaeological sample, and recovery biases are, for example, collection procedures like intensity of survey. So if I go, if I do a one-man survey, or if we work together with 5 persons collecting systematically with total pickup of artifacts on the surface. So it is intensity, person per day, by day, yeah. So it is, for example, or visibility in that sense of land use. So it is as well a statistical bias. Yeah. But if you look at the target population, so at the behavior and at the activities generating the assemblages, and you consider that you have, for example, very different activities like monumental porticus villae, nearby perishable material and huts. I don't know, they are very different starting points of archaeological record. So that's, yeah, so that's archaeological inference. Considering the assemblages, you will find here quantitatively and qualitatively more varied and more complex assemblages, and in this settlement probably only few sherds of handmade pottery, just in order to understand. And if you use only statistical inference, you would consider this location as background noise, or as like a non-site activity. But if you consider archaeological inference, you have a more flexible view probably, and complex, of course, more complex. So it is a problem, the use of statistics. But if we try to understand this kind of variability, it is probably as well justifiable that we continue to use statistics and GIS. So I'm not only negative, but I just wanted to put together some thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I will speak again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.